Christmas of 1979. I remember buying this book brand new in downtown Fort Worth at the long gone and much missed Barber's Bookstore, a bookstore that had been around for decades, and bought this right before I got on a train, an Amtrak train, headed to Chicago to spend Christmas up there that year. And I'm glad that I did bring a book to read, because if you've ever ridden an Amtrak from Fort Worth to Chicago, if you never have, I would not recommend it. They stop in every two-bit town and stop for no reason, and I probably could have hopped on a bicycle and got there quicker than that train got there. But I had this book to read, and so this was back when I was in ninth grade. I read through pretty much the whole book on the trip up there. But anyway, the Rolling Stones entry, they rate the albums from 5 stars to 1 star, and they have a bullet below the 1 star, which is for a worthless album. So about this album that I'm about to review here, they say Goat's Head Soup is a mistake, a jumble, or the beginning of the end, depending on whom you ask. Jagger's poses are encapsulated, or should I say embalmed forever, with claptrap like Dancing with Mr. D, which wouldn't scare a 4-year-old. Only Heartbreaker and Angie are up to the usual level, and they give Goat's Head Soup 1 star. And this book, like I said, this is the first. There are subsequent editions of this, I think, but this is the original edition. Cost a whopping $6.95. I wish books still cost in that price range now. But this is the 79, the original first edition of that book, which I've kept all these years. And that was, at that time, and to some people still is, the prevailing opinion that after this run of pure gold, the big four, starting with Beggar's Banquet and culminating with Exile on Main Street, that Stones could do no wrong, that they all of a sudden fell flat on their face with this album. This is the beginning of the end, is what a lot of people said and still say. And of course the highly ranked albums of the 60s before Beggars that came along. So a lot of people see this as the downfall, but some people like it. So I'm kind of in the middle there. Definitely, this has had. It's also an album that got some good reviews when it came out, but got mainly negative reviews. In the years since, there's been somewhat of a reappraisal of it, sort of like Ram or Wildlife from McCartney, that were pretty much slammed when they came out, but have seemed to be in a better light since then, and in some cases, with some people, considered a classic nowadays. Like I said, I fall somewhere in between. The Stones, at this point forward, 60s are over. They're definitely a different band going forward. I don't think they ever reached the heights that they did in the 60s and the early 70s past this. I don't think they're as good of a band, but they're not a bad band. They're just a different band, and they do reach greatness here and there, just not the same type of greatness. So this is the last album. Came out August 31st, 1973. Last album produced by Jimmy Miller, who had produced everything from Beggars through this album. He just kind of like Keith was just sinking into a haze of drugs and getting into some problems around this time. Got to number 1 in the United States and in England and other countries too, I'm sure. Back in '79, I was a huge Stones fan. I still am. Beatles and Stones. Huge Who fan. Hadn't really knew who the Kinks were, but hadn't really discovered them yet. But like I said, I was a freshman in high school, so it's not like I had a lot of money, and I'd been a Stones fan for several years, and I was buying their records as I could here and there with what little money I got, trying to collect all their back catalog. And so this one, in large part because of this Rolling Stone rating and review, was one that I thought, man, I'll get it eventually, but I'm not in any hurry, because I was only familiar with a couple of songs on the album, which I didn't really care for those 2 songs. We'll get to those. didn't know the rest of it, so I figured it was one that I would get in the by and by, and I did get it, but it was years later. This is actually the I think last year, the 2020. I think it's a remix, maybe it's just a remaster, but the deluxe edition with the bonus LP of some extra tracks and demos, and there's the regular LP there, and the cover. Of course, you got Mick in the scarf or netting or whatever he's wearing there. The idea was for him to look like Katharine Hepburn in The African Queen, which I guess he kind of does. There's Keith looking like a severed head on drugs, and inside you get Bill, Charlie, and Mick Taylor. And interestingly enough, Wyman only plays on 3 or 4 songs on this album, so he's kind of MIA for much of this album. This is the start of the Stones. Again, Keith still descending into drug addiction, which would run through most of the 70s. The Stones sort of beginning the point where they're more following trends rather than setting trends as they had in the previous decade, especially on Jagger's part. Jagger more and more interested, less and less interested in being a British rock star, more interested in being sort of a celebrity. You get into this is a deep into the Stones sort of silliness and cock rock period, and a lot of times you've got shock value, I think, just for the sake of shock value, as opposed to having some kind of point or artistic merit to it. But it's a pretty good album. It's not as good. I wouldn't rate it as good as the 4 that came before it. I wouldn't rate it as good as a lot of their 60s albums. I wouldn't rate it as good as some of the albums that come after it, to be honest. But it's I think it's better than its reputation in a lot of cases. It is, in my opinion, sort of a chill out album, as opposed to a background music album, because a background music album indicates that the album's really not that good. It's just something that, if you're doing laundry or making dinner or something, an album you can put on just for some background music. Extra Texture by George Harrison, that's a great background album because it's not a very good album, but it's perfect for playing while you're doing house chores or something. But I would rank this more of a chill out album, because it's an album that's it's not their best. It's sort of mid-level Stones, but the Stones being so great, mid-level Stones is a lot better than 90% of anyone else's music. And it's for mid-level, it's actually really good, which sounds like a contradiction in terms, but pretty good album. It's just a good album to put on, kick back, kind of delve into it and soak it in, or play it while you're reading a book. A lot of songs recorded for this that didn't show up till later albums. Tattoo U's Tops and Waiting on a Friend and Tops showed up on Tattoo U about 8 years later. Both great songs. I don't know why they didn't use it for this album. Short and Curly is not such a great song from this period, but it shows up on the next album. It's Only Rock and Roll. The other thing on this album, for me, and this comes as a surprise to some people, but there's not a standout. There's some really good music, some really good songs, really good grooves on this album, in my opinion. There's no standout instant classic. There's no hit. There were hits from this album, but I mean, in my opinion, there's no Rocks Off, there's no Brown Sugar, no Gimme Shelter type just instant classic, but there are a lot of good songs. So it's also, the Stones are throughout the 70s and going forward, Mick would sort of chase trends with reggae's the big thing, disco's the big thing, soul music's the big thing, this is the big thing, this is the big thing, and sort of seems like he got a little less interested in the blues and the rock and roll that were the Stones' mainstay starting out. and more interested in sort of staying hip and current and keeping up with whatever was the thing of the moment, to his and the Stones' detriment a lot of times. But there's some of that here, and it actually works to the band's advantage. But Billy Preston's here, and Nicky Hopkins, and all the usual um, Bobby Keys and so forth, the usual session players with the Stones. So because of Preston, there's Preston's always great. So there's a funk and a soul groove to a lot of this album, which works much to its benefit, I think. Anyway, we'll get into the tracks. First song, the opening song, Dancing with Mr. D, probably the weakest opener of the last, well, I don't know, going back the last 6 or 7 albums. All the openers were better than this. Silly song compared to something like, say, Sympathy for the Devil, but it's also a bit repetitive, but repetitive in a good way. It's a bit too long, but that's okay. For all its faults, it's this steady, kind of a mid-paced groove to it. Guitar midway through that comes in, which is Mick Taylor, I believe, is really nice. It's doesn't add up to much. It's a bit of a silly song, not the best opener, but it's a nice little groove, and it grows on you. Silliness aside, you kind of grow to love it over time. I can't rate it too high. I'm going to give it a 6.8, but by no means is it a horrible song. Probably not the best choice for the opener. Should have been on the album, but probably maybe should have been somewhere else on the album. Second song, 100 Years Ago. This is Mick in another rare sort of reflective mood. Folky song. Don't know if he's singing about just aging and growing old, because at the time he would have been 30, I guess around 30 or so, which was really old for a rock and roll star back in those days. And so you might be thinking of just getting older and what's next. You might be talking about Marianne Faithfull, because they had just recently broken up. Might be talking about the 60s and, going into the 70s, and things just weren't the same anymore. Like the line, is it wise not to grow up? Then when you get to the You're Gonna Kiss Me, the wah-wah funky guitar, and when you get to the Lazy Bones lyrics, just mix kind of put upon drawl, but it's funny and effective and it works. Great play out to the song. You've got Preston on clavinet, Keith plays bass, Nicky Hopkins on piano. So that's a classic, maybe the best song on here. 100 Years Ago gets a 10. Now we go to the Keith song of the album, and like I've said before, it's always good to. The Keith song's always a treat, and it's same here. I think a lot of people probably don't like this song because it's a little slow, even a little boring maybe. But Coming Down Again, it's written primarily by Keith. I think Jagger's on it on backing vocals, but it's a ballad mainly about Anita Pallenberg, his wife, girlfriend, whatever she was, the girl who had previously been with Brian Jones, and then he didn't treat her too well, so Keith stepped in and pretty much took her away from him. Some funny, maybe not the most tasteful lines: slip my tongue into someone else's pie, and being hungry, it ain't no crime, which Jeff Calico Silver, in his review of this album about a year ago, he's a big Stones fan. He's got a great channel, talks about the Stones and a lot of other great music, but he said that's kind of not a very good lyric. It's not, but I kind of like it because it sounds like a lyric that you'd find in an old 30s or 40s blues song, so it kind of works. Some backing vocals by Jagger, just a sleepy, slow burn of a song. Nice, really neat saxophone solo by Bobby Keys that shines, and one of Keith's best vocals, because again, Keith's far from the best vocalist out there, but he actually really tries on this song, and it works really well. So yeah, Coming Down Again, a lot of people don't like that song. I think it's really good. I'm going to give it a 9.5. Now we come to one of the 2 hits off the album, whatever, Heartbreaker. Love the opening. I think it's Preston on the organ or the clavinet, just sort of this funky. Then the wah wah guitar comes in from Mick Taylor. A song about a boy shot by the police who in a case of mistaken identity, and a young girl, 10 years old, who's a junkie who shoots up and ODs and dies. So hardly the cheerful thing, but it's an upbeat song. Got to number 15 in America as a hit single. Got kind of a Santana sounding interlude midway through the song, and the pace picks up again. I don't know how to rank this song really, because it's one of those cases where it's a good song, and it is, but it's not a song that's ever done all that much for me. I like the first few seconds of the opening. The rest of the song, while it's really good, just never really moved me. But I'm going to give it a 7, and I know some people would. It's considered a Stones classic, would rate it higher. Some people might rate it lower, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7. It's a good song. It's just one that I don't dislike, but just never really did cartwheels over. I'll put it that way. Now we come to arguably and a lot of people love this song. It was a #1 hit. I knew a girl who said it's her favorite Stones song. An old friend of mine way back when. Arguably my least favorite Stones song ever. It's mainly penned by Keith, which is surprising because you think something like this would be a Jagger deal. But it's got the longing, it's got the heartbreak and the yearning feel to it. But to me, it's just always been annoying as hell song. Never could stand it. It sounds, it's got more grit than that, but it sounds too 70s singer-songwriter soft rock. It's too much grit in here that you could ever imagine someone like James Taylor or Brett or Paul Simon doing it. I mean, that wouldn't work at all. But I just never liked the song, and it's just an opinion, folks. So if you love the song, if it's one of your favorite Stones songs, I'm not saying that it's a god-awful song. I'm just saying it's a song that I never could stand, to be honest. I know on the video, several videos back, I don't remember which one, but I happened to mention that Tom Petty, great guy, but his music, I always considered it pretty milquetoast and boring and never did anything for me. And of course, some blockhead got his panties all in a twist and went in the comments section and, oh, Tom Petty is not boring. You don't know what you're talking about. And then he went on one of my other videos and said, I don't know how to do this, and I need to stop doing this and do something else. And I wrote back, called him a dickhead. Then I deleted the comment and blocked him. But it's opinion, people. Some songs you love, some songs you don't. Some songs that everyone else loves, you don't love. Some songs that no one else loves, you absolutely adore. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just all opinion about music or whatever. Just have fun with it. Anyway, Angie, I can't stand the song. I know it's a hit. I know a lot of people love it. If you love it, that's great. Hope you enjoy it. Side 2, Silver Train, kind of the growly, snotty Mick vocal affectations. Song about a prostitute. So, probably something that Mick has personal knowledge of there in his writing. Didn't know her name, but liked the way she laughed and took my money. Always kind of liked that line. The song, Silver Train being in the title, musically, it sort of chugs along and it sort of paints the picture of a train flying down the track. And in that way, it reminds me of the great Velvet Underground song from the album Loaded, Train Round the Bend, which also kind of gives you that mental picture of a train going round the bend or speeding down the track. They don't really sound alike otherwise, but they both sort of conjure imagery of a train through musical, sort of an oral picture of a train there. I think 7.8 for Silver Train. I think it's a pretty good song. It's nothing major, but it's for an album track, it's a pretty good one. Hide Your Love is sort of a strange, stuck between a rocker and a ballad song, slightly bluesy song. It's a bit of filler, but pretty damn good filler at that. So I'm going to give that a 7 for Hide Your Love. Winter is a song that's credited to Mick and Keith as the writers. Keith's not even on the song and really didn't have anything to do with it. It's actually written by Mick and Mick Taylor, and of course he doesn't get credit because Keith and Mick were pretty stingy about ever sharing credit with any of the other band members, which is unfortunate. But song that both criticizes and celebrates winter and celebrates summer. It's funny because it was a song that was written in, I don't know if it was written there. Well, I think it was written there, and it was recorded in Jamaica, which is hardly what you think of when you think of wintertime settings. But Jagger plays guitar, so does Taylor, of course. It's got strings on it like Moonlight Mile, sort of a drowsy, lethargic feel to the song, but it's also kind of a beautiful ballad of a thing. Very laid back, like much of the rest of this album. Just sort of laid back in no hurry to get anywhere, and that's kind of the secret weapon or the magic of this album, I think, that it's just sort of relaxed and chilled out and laid back and invites you to come in and just groove with it on a lot of these songs. Can You Hear the Music starts off with sort of a flute, and kind of think of, well, Brian Jones with all his musical accents and exotic instruments, and goes into a piano. It's got that sort of 70s liquid piano vocal feel that you only heard on songs back in the 70s. It's about the magic of music and how that can lift you up when you're down and life's pressing in on you and help out. Another song that's a filler, but a really good filler song. I'm going to give it a 8.8. The album concludes with Star Star, also known as Starfucker. Mick singing in a over-the-top, affected body voice. Silly. This is a perfect example of the Stones getting into, let's be controversial or shock value just for the sake of shock value. But it's also fun. I mean, it's just so kind of stupid and silly. It's about groupies singing about Ally McGraw getting mad at her because she gave Steve McQueen a nice little present there, and how she wants to sleep with John Wayne, and Mick singing Starfucker, Starfucker over and over, and it's a lot of energy to the song. It's nonsense, funny, silly, goofy. Hardly a great song. I'll give it a 6.5 because it is fun. Album overall, I'm going to give it a 7.9. This one with the bonus disc has some other songs that were recorded back then but not on the album. Crisscross, pretty good song, and Scarlet, which has Jimmy Page, which is a really good song, actually as good or better than anything else on the album. I wish they would have included that. But Scarlet is a upbeat rocker and probably would not have really fit in with the sort of laid back groove and soulful feel of this album. So yeah, it's a step down. It's a different Stones, but it's not terrible by any means, and it is kind of a grower. It takes some time for some people to get into this. Some people take right to it, but 7.9. It's got a bad reputation, but it's better than its reputation if it's not exactly up there with albums like Beggars and Let It Bleed and Between the Buttons and so forth. But it's a worthwhile addition to your Stones collection, and we'll be back with the next album up, It's Only Rock and Roll, later on. So everybody have a good weekend. We'll talk to you later.